Dr. Haley Kumar. We are up to the sixth line from the top on Daf Nun Hiyam and Aleph, and we're discussing the challenges that the Goyim asked Zikni Yisrael about why HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't just destroy the Avoda Zara. So Shol Agrippas Sar Tzava Es Rabbi Gamliel. Rashi says that Agrippas was Ovid Kechav Moyer. He was a guy, Memuna al Rosh Geisers. He was like the general of the army, Uvimei Agrippas HaMelech Haya, and he was in the time of Agrippas HaMelech. I believe Agrippas HaMelech was from the base Chasvanoi. So he asked Rabbi Gamliel, Siv b'teiraschem, it says in your Torah, Ki Hashem Elokecha, Eish Oich Lahu. He's a fire. Kael Kana, and he's a Rebbeinu who is Mikane. Klum Miskane, Ela Chacham v'Chacham. Who is a Chacham going to be jealous of? Someone who's a greater Chacham than him. V'Gibor, or a Gibor and a Gibor, or V'Asher. So why would the Rebbeinu Shalom have such a kanois neged Avoda Zara? Does that not give the Avoda Zara validity? Amaloi, so Rabbi Gamliel answered, I'm going to give you a mashal. La'adam shenasa isha al ishtay. Someone who took another wife over his first wife. Chashuva mimena, if she is more chashuv than the first wife, ein miskanava. She will not, the first wife won't be so angry. Chusa mimena, but if the second wife is less than the first wife, then miskanava. She'll say, for this, you married another wife? So the Marsha brings down that there's two things here of kina. There's the kina kineged, the second wife, and on that, Agrippas thought that that's what the kina is. The kina is anger at the second wife. So he asked, why would she be angry at the second wife that's not even as good as her? She shouldn't be jealous of her. So Rabbi Gamliel answered that the kina is not connected the second wife. The kina is connected the husband who's betraying his wife, and there it's punfaker. If her husband would betray her for a woman who was obviously greater than the first wife, then she wouldn't be so angry at her husband. But if her husband is going to take a second wife that's not as good as his first wife, that would make her even more angry at her husband. So too, the Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't care about the getchka. The Rebbeinu Shalom is upset at us that we are trading in a Rebbeinu Shalom for a getchka that's useless. Zog to Gemara weiter. Amalei Zunin le Rabbi Akiva. Zunin told Rabbi Akiva, and Rashi tells that Zunin was a Yid, and he said, "Libi v'libcha, my heart and your heart, Yoda both know. We both know that avodas kachavim less by mishash. We know that avodas are garnished, but there's something bothering me. V'kachazinon gavri, you do see stories about a person. The Azli Kimitpuri, he's going to go to the Getchka when he has an ailment. There's something broken about him. But also when he comes back, Kimitzvadi, he is in fine form. As Rashi says, Kimitpuri is Pisechim, people who limp. Due to their sickness, their limbs aren't aligned properly. And they come back in perfect fine form. Is this not something that seems to indicate that there's some validity to the Avodah Zara? Yes, I know Avoda. I'm a Maimon. I know the Avodah is garnished to Rebbeinu Shalom. But isn't it funny? My time, or why is it that way? Why did the Kadosh Baruch Hu let that happen? Amaloi. So Rabbi Akiva answered, I'm going to give you a mashal l'ma'at davar daima. The Adam Neman shahaya be'ir. There was an Adam Neman, someone who was a very trustworthy person who lived in the city. And Vibalti was trustworthy. Everyone used to leave their items by him. He would be their shomer, and they wouldn't even require Adam when they gave the pekaton over. because they knew that this fellow was rock solid. They could trust him, that he would never deny that he received a pikadon from them, and he would watch it carefully and would give it back to them. And there was one person who didn't trust him, and he would only ever give a pikadon even to this trustworthy person, be'edim. Pamach, once upon a time, shachach, the person who normally didn't trust his fellow and would only give him pikadon with edim, gave him a pikadon without edim. So now they have a perfect opportunity to deny that they ever received this pikadon. Why? Because he won't be able to produce edim, and everybody knew that this fellow always only gave with edim. Amr lo ishtoi. So his wife told him, "Boy, let's deny it. First of all, we'll teach him a lesson. Here, he never trusted us all this time, so we'll teach him about trust, and let's now deny that we ever received it." Amr, he told her, "Is it about him or is it about us?" Also, shaloi kahagen. Just because this shoita did shaloi kahagen, and the way I understood the shaloi kahagen is that he didn't have edim over here. Rabbi Razer explained the shaloi kahagen is that all these years he never trusted us. So what, we should teach him a lesson. Anu noivad es amunasenu. We should lose our trustworthiness. Why should we do that? Avkach. So too, to answer your shaila, Zunin, why is it seem that sometimes somebody gets healed when he goes to an Avoda Zara? Avkach yisurin, b'shah shemeshagrin oishin ala adam. When the Rebbeinu Shalom sends yisurin on a person, he doesn't just send them willy-nilly. Rather, mashpia oisam. They're mashpia the yisurin before you can go and inflict the yid. Shaloitechu ela b'yoyim ploini. You only have a right to go on this day. You can't just go whenever you want. You have to go on this day. And when you leave, when the Yisurim have to leave this person, it should be on this day. And at this time, and through this doctor, and through this medicine. When it comes time for the Yisurim to leave, as it was scheduled to leave the moment it even came, it was scheduled to leave at this time. Punkt halach zeh lebeis avodas kechavim. And the Mefarshim say, fakeret the Yitzhahara of Avoda Zara doubles and triples down when it knows anyway that this seed's going to get a refuah. So it tries to convince him to go to a base of Avoda Zara so that when the refuah comes, this yid will be fooled into thinking that the Avoda Zara did it. So halach zeh lebeis avodas kechavim. Amru Yisurim. The Yisurim will say, now that if we leave, even though we're sworn to leave now, if we leave, it's going to cause that the Yitzhar is going to tell him, and the Getchka is going to claim credit for this refuah. So really, dinhu shaloi neitzei. We should really not leave. We should bidavka remain longer, so it shouldn't look like the Getchka is providing this refuah. But they don't do that. Rather, they say, because this sick person who's a shoita and he's going and reaching out to Avoda Zara, he did something improper. We should violate our shvu that we made when we were originally sent to inflict this person. And this is Rabbi Yochanan said. It says v'chaloim royim, bad chaloim v'ne'amanim, but trustworthy chaloim. Royim b'shlichusam. The shlichus is very bad. They inflict yidn with yisurim. But v'ne'amanim b'shvuasam. But they're neman under shvua. No matter what they felt justification for remaining in place, they leave exactly when they were told to leave. So it looks like the Avoda Zara is impacting the refuah, but really the Avoda Zara has nothing to do with the refuah. Omrei Rava bar Yitzchak leRabbi Huda. Ha'ika beis avodas kechavim ba'asrin. We have a Getchka house. We have a house of Avoda Zara in our city. The chimatrich alma lemitra. When the world needs rain, mischazi lohu bechalma. The Getchka shows itself to people in a dream, but Amar Lahu, and the Getchka tells people, Shachtu li gavra, sacrifice a human on my behalf. The icy mitra, and it will rain. So people wake up saying, I had a dream, I had a vision. The Avoda Zara came to me and told me that the way for us to have a Yeshua and to have rain is by sacrificing a person. Shachtu Lagavar, they listened and they did that. Vasa Mitra. So Rabbi Ravitzik asked Rabbi, why does HaKadosh Baruch Hu do such a thing? Omer Lei. So Rabbi Yehuda said, Baruch Hashem, I'm still alive today. Because if I would have not been alive, I would never have had the opportunity to tell you the beautiful mimer that I'm going to tell you now. I would have never had the opportunity to share with you this beautiful mimer that I learned from Rav. It says in the Pasuk, let's have a look at the Pasuk inside, and it says, and this I think we're going to learn this week. Uvantiza Shemaima, V'ra'isas Hashemesh, V'sayareach, V'sakrechovim, Koil Tzuvah Shemayim, V'nidachta, V'shtachavisa Lahem, V'avadatam. And then it says, Asher Cholak Hashem Alakecha Oisam L'cholamim. The sun, the moon, and all these planets were all given by HaKadosh Baruch Hu as a gift to all of the world. Malamed, it teaches us. It doesn't say Asher Nosan Hashem Alakecha Oisam L'cholamim. Asher Cholak Hashem. What is the sign? What is the remez in the word Asher Cholak? Malamed Shechlikan Bidvarim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu made it that they could be somewhat manichan litos. It could cause Klal Yisrael to make a toss. Not that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is taking an active role in fooling Klal Yisrael, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu leaves an opportunity for people to fool themselves, to destroy them from the world. If someone wants to be a LETZ, they let him be a LETZ. They don't help him be a LETZ, but they let him be a LETZ. But someone who's an honor, someone who wants to reach the Gedula, Yitein Chen, HaKadosh Baruch Hu assists. Someone wants to be Tameh, he wants to do an Aveir, they let him. They open the door for him. But if someone wants to be Mitar, they actually help him grow better. And there are those who are daik, im leleitzim hu yalitz. If you want to be a letz, hu yalitz. We will let you be a letz. Who's going to help you be the letz? Yourself, hu yalitz. But ulanavim yitin chen, to another chen will be given. Will be given from who? It means will be given to him from others, from Shemayim, chen will be added. So the pasuk itself is mashma that l'ra leleitzim it's hu yalitz. We're just going to let you do it. But you're going to receive from a third party help in order to help you achieve greatness. So Pashup Pshat in this Gemara is if someone's objective, someone's thirst, someone's yearning is for Gedula, he will be helped to grow. But if someone wants to do improper things, he will not be stopped from doing those things. The Chidah here relates a fascinating story and puts a little bit of a twist on what the limud from these psukim are. And he said over a story about two people that were marooned on a ship and they were stuck without food for many, many days, without food or drink for many, many days. And somehow they made it to land. And they were starved, thirsty, and just looking for anybody who would give them food, knocking on doors. And one of these Eden knocked on one door, and the Chidah does not say this as a mashal. The Chidah relates this as a true story. It must have happened sometime in the 1500s, and I hope my dating is right with the life of when the Chidah lived. And I might be wrong, it might be later, but the reason why I thought it was around that period is because of the rest of the story. So they each knocked on doors, and in each place they were received with kindness. It was a completely Christian, Goyish city, and they were taken in, and they were given to eat and drink. But one of the guys in one of the two houses got a tap on the shoulder after he finished eating, and he was told by his host, I just want you to know, because he was obviously Jewish, but everybody in the city were Goyim. And the host says, I want you to know, I'm a hidden Jew, like I'm a Rano. Here, if you practice Judaism openly, you can get killed. So I'm a hidden Jew, but I want you to know the meat that I gave you to eat was basar shchuta, it was kosher meat. The other, so he was so relieved, Baruch Hashem, I had to eat, I was starving and I would have died, but Baruch Hashem, Hashem arranged it that I should be saved with kosher food. I didn't have to be nichjo on my cholos isuros. The other Yid who was in a different place didn't have that benefit. So he felt very bad. Why is it that my friend was zoicha to be fed with kosher food, yet I was, although I'm grateful that Hashem saved my life and I was given food, but it was with trefa food. So he went to his Rav when he got back to his home, and he asked the Rav, why is this? So the Rav said, did you ever eat non-kosher food in your life willingly when you were not forced for whatever reason? And he said, yes. And then they asked a friend, did you ever eat non-kosher food? And he said, no, I was very makbid on kashrus. So the Rav told him, if someone is not makbid on certain averos, then opportunities for these averos will come to him, and he'll be nichsha. But if someone was very makbid on kashrus, of course Hashem's going to make it even in difficult times. He'll be zoicha to find kosher food. Zok the heilige Mishnah weiter. Loichin gas. So now we're getting out of the Agadta. We're getting back into the halachas of Yain Esed, and maybe a little bit of Paspalter. So in order to understand this Mishnah, we have to have a little bit of an idea of how ancient wine presses looked. So the way ancient wine presses looked was they were generally, you could look online, there's many ancient wine presses. Maybe I'll even find a picture of one online that I could share. It won't be perfectly accurate with our Gemara, but it will be pretty interesting in what it is. So I'm going to pull up a picture of an ancient wine press. Okay, this is a picture of an ancient wine press. So the way it used to work is they would first put a whole bunch of grapes into this big vat, was built into the ground, and people would literally walk on it, and it would start loosening up and causing wine to flow. Then it would all be on an incline, and then the stuff would be pushed into. So first of all, when they're stomping on the grapes, whatever liquid was in there would be on an incline, and you could see there's a bar on the ground, in the ground, that is lined with sid, so it shouldn't absorb or leak. And you can see there's a little crack over here. So at the bottom of this vat, which was inclined towards this bar, the wine would drain out and go into the bar. But there was also, and that's not showing in this picture, a press where they would put heavy beams on the rest of the mulch. I think in English it's called meat. And it would further put pressure on those grapes to squeeze more out of them. There's a lot of pictures of ancient wine presses, and all over Eretz Yisrael and all over Bovel, you find a lot of these ancient wine presses. And basically, there was the first vat that the grapes went into, that people stomped on, and then it would run down, and then there's the second vat that was pressed upon. So here in this picture, it's a little bit more apparent because you see there's this big vat that people are in. It's hard to see, but then there's this huge beam over here that they would lower down with a screw type of mechanism that would put weight If you see there's a big beam that goes across, and underneath the beam there's some type of wooden cage assembly that would press down on grapes. So after the people stepped on the grapes, then the mush will be pushed over, because this whole thing was on an incline. This will be pushed over to be underneath this weighted wooden frame, and then they would squeeze it further with the press, and then this whole area was inclined to go into a bar, and the wine would flow into a bar, and that's where they would have the wine. Okay. So the halach is loichin gas be'uta min ha'ovet kachov. Now, if you're going to buy a wine press from Goyim, we need to be concerned that it's full of yayin nesach. Nevertheless, zok to Mishnah, even though the gas was used, and the gas be'uta means a gas that was actually used, as Rashi teaches, shebata v'dorcha ovet kachavim. A goy had already stepped on grapes in this gas. You're allowed to buy it from a goy, and there's no chash of yayin nesach. So you're allowed to buy it from ovet kachavim. Afal pi shehu noitel biyadoi v'noisen l'tapuach. Even though after the goy steps on the grapes to extract wine from them, he then lifts up the mush of the grapes in his hand, and he puts it into the tapuach, which was an area under which they put that press. So that was the second stage of the pressing of the wine. He would actually literally lift it up with his hands. So if it's in his hands, he could be being menasachet Avoda Zara, and he put it in the puach. It was like a bowl-shaped area that would be right underneath the press, but it's not considered yayin nesach. The einay oisa yayin nesach ad sheyered labar. This juice here is not considered wine. It doesn't have a status of wine. So therefore, it's not subject to any problem of yayin nesach. Until it's running down into the bar, that's where it's called wine. There, if the guy handles the wine, there you'll have a problem of yayin nesach. But up in the press area, it's not yet called wine, and therefore there's no problem of yayin nesach. But yarad labar, once the wine is already draining down into the bar, mashe bebar aser v'ashar muter. Whatever's in the bar itself will be aser, because the guy could have made it into yayin nesach. But anything above the bar would not be aser, because that's not wine. That's the first halach of the Mishnah. Second halach of the Mishnah is dorchin im ha'oived kechavim begas. You're actually allowed to work together with the guy and stomp on the grapes together with him in the gas. What is the concern? The concern is, Rashi says, you might be v'lo yamrinon. We don't say that mistaker be isurei hanahu. He's benefiting from isurei hanahu. If you're working for him and helping him, and he's going to pay you. So what are you doing? You're working with isurei hanahu. You're working with yayin nesach, and you're having hanahu from isurei hanahu. That's not allowed. Zok the Gemara or Zok the Mishnah, that's not a problem, because it's not yayin nesach. While it's still in the gas, while it's still in the pressing stage, it's not yayin nesach. It's not yayin. Tafilu b'shtia sover haitana deshari. You'd even be allowed to drink this wine, kozman shelo yarad labar, as long as the wine hasn't drained down yet into the bar. Umishum goyim tuma leka. Now Rashi brings up there's another potential problem. The halacha is there's a gzeir derabbanan. You're not allowed to bring tuma to Paris in Eretz Yisrael, and you're going to be going tuma to Paris in Eretz Yisrael because the vat is tamei. Everything of the guy is tamei, but that's not a problem because you're not causing that. You're not coming with him to start the dricha process. He's already stomping on the grapes, and then he hires you to join him. At that point, everything is tamei already, so you're not causing any tumah. You're not helping a guy being mitaba anything, because the guy doesn't have that aver. But we're going to soon see in this same scenario, if there is a yid that's not makbid on keeping it tahar, you would not be allowed to help the yid, because there you're being mesayeh the yid in his avera of being mitama payers to their Yisrael. But for a guy, there's not an issue.
The first cistern, it's not wine yet. So why would that?
So you're saying it's not fermented yet?
Yeah, not fermented yet.
So there's a shita who holds. I mean, the Gemara seems to hold that even though it's not fermented, it's still considered wine. Even grapes is considered wine. Although there going to be a shita who holds that only once it starts to ferment.
Yeah, we hold them. Even grapes, we don't eat anything.
Even grape juice were makbid on yain esef.
Yeah. Or
Okay,
even any product that had grape in it.
that's right, because we're concerned that juice came out of that grape, and that's and there would be a yain esef there. Okay, Zok to Gemara, turning on to Amid Beis. Avoloi boitrin ima. What you wouldn't be allowed to do together with a goy is pull grapes from the tree. And why can't you do that? Because you know what you do with the grapes that you pull off the tree? Where do you put them? Zok Rashi Levi shenoisten the gas tamea. Because what you're going to do is you're going to unload it right into the gas tamea, which means you're causing tumah to the payers of Eretz Yisrael. The garim tumahu, and that's not allowed. Shenishinosan legas l'shem drichahu. Why are you putting it into the press? Not because you want to preserve the pears to eat them as a snack. Rather, you want the wine that's coming out of them. Udrichason titama. And the moment they're pressed, they will become tameh. The kaidim dricha vade loy makabla tuma. There's tama lehukshu. So Rashi is pointing out, even when you're doing bitzira and you're placing the grapes in the gas, you have not yet made them tameh because they were not hukshu lakabla tuma yet. They didn't come into contact with any one of the 7 mashkim. So therefore they weren't hoksher, but you're goyim tumah because very shortly the dricha is going to start and they're going to become tumah. That we learned that even if you were merely boiter for the gas, but you haven't yet pressed it, so you have payers, they're hoksher l'kabel tumah right away, which contradicts what Rashi just said. That if you know for a fact that they were oozing grape juice, and we want the grape juice because the whole bitzira is to extract juice from the grapes. The kasavar also ligram tuma lechulin sheberetz Yisrael. Our Mishnah holds it's also to be goyim tuma even on chulin that's in Eretz Yisrael. Yisrael shu oisa b'tumah. What about if a yid owned this gas and he was running the operation, but he wasn't makbid on tahira, which he was being over the Isur Rabbanon of being goyim tumah to chulin Eretz Yisrael. So Yisrael shu oisa b'tumah. Loy dorchen v'loy boitrin ima. You're not allowed to do anything with him. Even though it's tameh already by the time you got there, you're not allowed to assist him. Because we still consider that misayeya l'dei oiver avera. You're helping an oiver avera. You're not allowed to help. What you are allowed to do is avol melichan imay chavayos lagas. You're allowed to help him. You're allowed to deliver empty barrels to his gas that he will use to bottle the wine with, because there you're not being misayeya the oiver avera. Umavian imay minagas, and you're allowed to bring loaded barrels. You're allowed to deliver them to his wholesalers or to his retailers. Why? Because you're not impacting anything tamei. Any tumah is coming directly from the goy. You're not involved. You're not being misayeya in the act of being metam. Zok Rashi, the Yisrael oisa peroisa b'tumah is oivar veru. He's not allowed to make payers tamei. Hilchach afilu dorchan nami aser. Even to help him press them is aser. Shedrichatzon ba'avera begas tameya, because he's pressing them in a gas that's tamei. Udrichatzon hu ikar tumasan kishenasin mashka hem tamein alidei gas. When do these grapes become tamei? When they're being pressed in the press, because that's when they become a liquid. So that's why it's aser to work with the yid. He's not allowed to do that. He's not allowed to press fruits, press grapes in a tamei gas. The aser lisayeya yidei oiver avera, and you're not allowed to help this yid who's doing an avera. Therefore, ela portion mehen kedei shelo yagam kach. Don't work for him in such a factory because you don't want to help him succeed. We'd rather discourage him from doing these things. But a guy is allowed to do that. There's no issue for a guy to be metame Paris. La oiver averu shelo nitztaf. You are allowed to deliver empty barrels to his factory, and you're allowed to provide delivery service to deliver barrels from his press to wholesalers and retailers. The ain't kam avera. There's no avera anymore. The me'acha shenitnu begas. Once they're tumbling the gas, you're not even getting involved there. You're only coming after they're bottled already. Mutter l'ses hayayin b'chaviyos tameos. So when you're bringing the chaviyos tameos, there's no problem because by the time he's going to put the wine into those chaviyos, the wine is long tummy. So you're not being Messiah, and you're allowed to take it away from the gas because again, you're not being Matame anything. Okay, Gavaltik. Now we're going to transition to bread. Nachton shu oise betum. A baker who is also baking betuma, which is also not allowed. Loy loshin, you're not allowed to knead. Loy orchen imoy, you're not allowed to set up the breads. Avol moilichan imoy pas lepalter. So it seems like the baker, Rashi says, just prepared the dough, but the actual baking it in the oven was done by a palter who was a goy. So the halach is you're not allowed to do that. Why? Because shekol ma'isa aricha zu ba'avera. Preparing this dough is ba'avera because he's being matama the dough. But once it's already completed, you're allowed to take it to the oven to bake because it's already tummy. Similar to taking the barrels away from the gas. Tosfos argues with Rashi because Tosfos holds you would absolutely not be allowed to help him bake his bread. As Tosfos says, Pirsha Kunjus Oifabas Veloidni here. The Havel Lememer Letaner. Why would it say Avol Melichel Imoy Pas Lepalter? It should say Avol Melichel Imoy Pas Letaner. You take it to bake. Voice very Tosfos. The Rebbe the Sefta Ein Messiah Nachtama Oisa Betuma. The Ein Melichel Imoy Letaner. So Zok Tosfos, I disagree with the halacha that Rashi learns from this Mishnah, and I hold you're not allowed to take the raw chalas to an oven to bake. Lakach nira that palter is a wholesaler of bread. I'm sorry, he's a retailer of bread. Palter is nachten kotna, small baker. Sholakeach harbe kikres biyachad min nachtoim godol. He buys a whole bunch of breads from the wholesaler. Kedei lemoichem al yad al yad. He's going to buy in bulk from the wholesaler, and he's going to sell to individuals little by little, which is what a classic retailer is. The time of the malichan imay pas lepalter, the reason why you're allowed to provide this delivery service for this bread, hainu mishum shekvar nigmara malaches avoda. There's nothing here happening anymore. We have completed breads that they're atome. V'zu malacha acheresi, it's a completely different malacha from the baking process. It's delivery process. And therefore that would be mutter, avoda halacha letaner would be asura. That we consider that still part of the baking process. Okay, Gavalti. Zok to Gemara weiter. Amar Avuna, Yayin, wine. Once it's starting to flow from the grapes, I say Yayin Esach to make Yayin Esach, which is a direct steer to our Mishnah, because our Mishnah says no matter how much wine is in the gas, it doesn't get its status of wine until it drains down into the bar. So Tanan we learned our Mishnah, loikrim bas buta mina ovid kachavim the afal pi should noitel biyadoi the noisein litapua. Even though the guy is handling it, it's still not yayin esach. So you have a clear raya keneged Ravuna, because here we have wine that's flowing already, yet it's not also yayin esach. Ravuna, you know how Ravuna can explain our Mishnah? The gas pekuka umalaya. You know what we're talking about? We're talking about a gas that the drain, where it drains down into the bar, is plugged. And therefore, there's a big bathtub, so to speak, of wine. That's not going to the bar. If it's not going to the bar, it's not flowing to the bar, there even Rav Huna agrees that it would not have the Shem of wine. Tashma, let's look at the later line in the Mishnah. It says, until it starts heading to the bar, it won't be yayin esach. But the mashma, once it's heading to the bar, it will be yayin esach. What the Mishnah means when it says means until it's actually flowing to the bar. But even though it's headed for the bar, but the plug is there, not allowing it to flow, it still will not be us. But now for the third line of the Mishnah, we're going to have a real problem. Because what does the third line of the Mishnah say? Yarad lebar, It's going now into the bar. There is wine in the bar, which means there's wine that's currently kinetically flowing from the gas to the bar. Masha bebar aser. Any wine that's in the bar is aser. Vashar mutter. So while it's flowing, as long as it's not in the bar yet, it's going to be mutter. That's keneged Rav Huna. Amar Rav Huna lakasha in Chadami. This Mishnah does not agree with what I'm saying. Kan be Mishnah Rishayna. Our Mishnah is the Mishnah Rishayna, which Rav Huna is not saying is halacha according to Kan be Mishnah Achrayna. Rav Huna's halacha that once the wine starts to flow, it's already wine, and will be nesach yayin esach. That is going according to the Mishnah Achrayna. The Tanya we learned, but Rishayna Yoimrim Badat. They said three halachas that were outlined with the Rosh Davis of Badat. What does that mean? Ein boitrin im oivet kachavim. You're not allowed to do bitzira with the goy. Begas she'asu ligram tuma l'chulin sheberetz Yisrael, which we learned in the Mishnah. Bitzira is a problem because there you are being goyim it should be tama. You're delivering tar the grapes into a gas that's tama. The ein darchen im Yisrael. So that's the dalit. You're not allowed to press together with the yid. Choice of price of batuma because she'asu l'sayeya yidei over avera. Avol dorchim ima oivit kachavim begas, but you are allowed to assist a goy in the gas. There, you're allowed to help him, like we said, because v'loy chashinu l'Ravuna. We don't consider it wine yet in the Mishnah Rishayna, and therefore it's mutter to be dorch with the goy together. But then the Mishnah Achrayna came along, v'chazru loymar either the bad or dabav dalad beis. The first halacha is ein dorchin. We shouldn't do Rafuna because the moment the wine starts to flow, it's already wine and it could become yayin esech. And then the in boitrin dabav. So we did a dalit of dorchin and now boitrin. The in boitrin in Yisrael she'oisa peiroisa betuma, which we had earlier, and the chol shegain she'in dorchin. You're not allowed to be dorch with the yid. Avol boitrin. So the last base is avol boitrin. Ima oivit kechavim begas. You're allowed to be boitzer with an oivit kechavim in the gas. Why? Shemuter ligrayim tuma l'chulin sheberetz Yisrael. Because it is muter to be goyim tuma to chulin Yisrael, which is what the Mishnah Achrayna holds. So let's have a look. Why can't you be boitzer with a yid? Mishum the goyim tumahu. We just said you're allowed to be boitzer with a guy, meaning there's no concern of bringing tuma to Paris in Eretz Yisrael. So why is there a problem doing with a Yisrael? There's no Isser. The teretz is Hanamili David Kachavim. Avol the Yisrael Tavula Meimel Truma. The Paris of a Yid are Tevel, meaning there's Truma content in them, or there's content in it that's going to be made into truma, and that you're not allowed to be mitama. V'asa ligram tuma truma. You might be allowed to make chulin tame, but definitely not truma. Tichsebani hinei nesati loch es mishmeres terumoisai b'loshen rabim v'shtei truma sekos v'daber. So even the tevel, you're not allowed to be mitama, and that's why you're not allowed to be boiter in my Yisrael shows a person with tumah. Even though you're allowed to be metama chulin, you're not allowed to be metama teva. Okay, Baruch Hashem, we were zoich to finish Daf Nun Hey, and be'etzim tomorrow we will learn Daf Nun Vav.
Good.
Shkoyach.